It's the afternoon of the 23rd of June 2016, and Nigel Farage is pacing nervously. Outside the red brick building in Westminster that his party UKIP calls home, the British people are heading to the polls to cast their vote in a referendum. Brexit.
Today is the day, decision day. Will the British electorate vote to remain a member of the European Union or leave the bloc in today's defining referendum?
Farage's entire career has been building to this moment.
This is the referendum that no one thought was going to happen. It's the referendum that the Prime Minister hoped he would never have to deliver.
Once upon a time, the Prime Minister had accused him of leading a rabble of fruitcakes, loonies and closet racists. David Cameron is not so sure-footed now. After a blur of battle buses and media scrums and debates lasting months, the vote is on a knife edge. Now there's nothing more Farage can do, nothing but wait and nervously shuffle back and forth. And so, Farage's chief of staff, his closest advisor, pipes up with an idea. He reckons they need what they call a PFL, a proper fucking lunch. This is George Cottrell, known universally as Posh George, then just 22. He hasn't known Nigel Farage for long, but he seems to understand him better than anyone. Along with the millionaire donor Aaron Banks, they head to a restaurant a short walk from Harrods in Knightsbridge, where they can be themselves, surrounded by fresh flowers, crisp tablecloths, and lobster linguine. On roughly the third bottle of Chianti, the mood picks up, and the referendum results start to trickle in.
The total number of votes cast in favour of leave was 82,000.
To some within the group, the news that early constituencies strongly support leave isn't just politically exciting, it's a money-making opportunity. George heads back to the campaign office, where he opened his laptop to track the currency markets. Despite it being the very thing he campaigned for, George knows if the country votes to leave, the value of the pound will plummet. He decides to make the most of it, doing what's known as shorting the currency by selling pounds for dollars and buying them back for less, pocketing the difference. By the time the result was declared,
the British people have spoken and the answer is, we're out.
George Cottrell says he has made a six-figure sum. He calls the evening the best night of my life. The next day, he claims, he bets most of his winnings on a horse and ends up with nothing. George later tells this story to a newspaper with an air of, who cares, as though the loss doesn't matter. After all, Posh George is in Farage's inner circle. He's been given a role and a front seat to history at a remarkably young age. Perhaps now, nothing can touch him. I'm Gabriel Pogrund. I run the Insight Investigations team at the Sunday Times, and together with my colleagues Venetia Menzies and Emanuele Midolo, we've spent the last few months trying to understand just how a convicted fraudster with no official party role has worked his way into the heart of British politics, standing by the man who could win the next election. From the Times and Sunday Times, this is Posh George, the criminal behind Farage. Ep.2, Jailbird. It's hard to remember these days just how much of a shock the Brexit vote was. At the crack of dawn on the 24th of June, Nigel Farage headed down to Westminster to bask in the victory.
June the 23rd needs to become a national bank holiday, and we will call it Independence Day. Thank you.
As the camera pans out, you can just about spot George Cottrell on the lawn outside Parliament, dutifully applauding a couple of rows back. It had been a dramatic and divisive campaign which smashed perceived norms. None more so than Farage's poster depicting a queue of Syrian refugees near the Croatia-Slovenia border. The caption, "Breaking point." Farage had revelled in the controversy. He sensed beneath it that his message might be cutting through. And now he stood vindicated, the face of a new kind of insurgent politics, not just in Britain, but around the world.
It is the establishment, it is the wealthy, it is the multinationals, it is the big banks, it is those whose lives have really done rather well in the last few years and will support remaining, and against it, it's the people.
Farage and several other self-styled bad boys of Brexit were quickly invited stateside, where one Donald Trump was on the campaign trail.
Our country needs a truly great leader.
Less than a month after the EU referendum, Farage lands in Cleveland, Ohio with George Cottrell. Hand on his back, you can see Posh George guiding Nigel through the crowds as journalists ask about the rise in anti-establishment politics.
And a lot of people who had never voted in their lives literally were turning up at polling stations and saying, what do we do? How do we vote? And that's because we inspired them.
Farage is relishing being on the global stage. He and Posh George are rubbing shoulders with the people who will soon be the most powerful in the world. But on the way home, they stop in Chicago, and as the plane door cranks open at O'Hare Airport, waiting on the gangway is a group of armed officers. In front of Nigel Farage, Posh George is handcuffed and hauled away. He appears in court the following day, in shackles and an orange jumpsuit.
So, I've finally got these court documents in front of me.
While George later claimed he had no idea what his arrest was about, in the Insight office, my colleague Venetia Menzies has tracked down the pages which tell the full story.
And it really sets out in quite a lot of detail over 100 pages of what actually happened.
The amount of information, as you say, Venetia, there's a hell of a lot of stuff. I think the only bit of information that you can't see is this financial affidavit illustrating his finances, but everything else is there, and you can see they've cast the net incredibly wide. He was facing a ridiculous array of charges at the time, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he was facing 21 counts, including conspiracy to commit money laundering, wire fraud, mail fraud, blackmail, and extortion. I mean, the penalty would have been up to 20 years for each of these charges, so Posh George at this point in his early 20s is facing potentially life in prison.
The story within these pages starts in 2014, and it starts on the dark web, on an application called Tor. Tor routes internet traffic randomly through thousands of relays across the world, making it much harder to trace a user's activity or location. It is totally legal and can be used by journalists to speak to anonymous sources. But you can also find those who like to conduct their activity without being identified for the wrong reasons. Hackers, paedophiles, drug dealers. And in March 2014, the court documents show someone calling themselves Banker put up an advert offering to advise people on how to launder money. That advert was spotted by US agents, who decided to reply, claiming they were drug traffickers. Could Banker help them launder $50,000 to $150,000 a month of their ill-gotten gains? Sure, Banker agreed, for a fee, and he suggested the undercover agents speak to an associate of his, Bill. Bill and the undercover agent started chatting through an encrypted messaging platform called CryptoCat. Bill was sure he could launder the drug money, he said, with complete anonymity and security. He set out different ways of doing it, how to transfer large amounts of drug money into offshore accounts without having to report it, how to move that money back into the US disguised as legitimate business income. Bill even said he had banking contacts who could help. And so they arranged to meet, in plain sight, under the bright humming lights of Las Vegas, for a high-stakes negotiation. It's April 2014 when the agents wait in their hotel suite for Bill. I imagine it feels a bit like waiting to meet a source for the first time. I know how nerve-wracking that can be, wondering if they'll show, what they'll be like, will they actually be the real deal? And eventually, there is a knock on the door. And who do they find? A then 20-year-old by the name of George Cottrell. They're surprised at how young he is. George and the officers, still pretending to be drug dealers, go to dinner. And the agents are impressed. Posh George, they find, really knows his stuff about US government procedures and anti-money laundering laws. His education in the grey zone of London banking shines through. Afterwards, Bill, or we should say George, keeps the conversation going online. And on the 9th of June, he asks them to send $20,000 of supposed drug money to an associate in Colorado. That contact, George claims, will convert the cash into a digital cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and send it to him before he launders the money and returns it. It's a test transaction, proof of concept before they go into business together. The agents send the money, but the $20,000 is never returned. Instead, around a week later, the documents claim George Cottrell demanded Bitcoin worth about $80,000, threatening that if he didn't receive it, he'd report the very drug dealers he previously offered to launder money for. Of course, George doesn't know the dealers he's threatening to expose are really undercover federal agents. There's silence for 2 years. Until July 2016, when Posh George steps off the plane in Chicago and is handcuffed in front of a shocked Nigel Farage. George pleaded not guilty to all 21 charges of fraud, blackmail, and extortion, but he's refused bail. The American court considers him a flight risk, especially because it discovers Posh George recently changed his name. It's still George Cottrell, but he's changed the spelling, dropping a T and an L from his surname when usually there are 2 of each. He claims he's done so because he wants to distance himself from UK politics. The judge considers it evidence of deception. Stuck in prison awaiting trial, Posh George briefly shares a cell with the murderer. Unable to stop himself gambling, a habit George has had since school, he apparently runs up a poker debt with the boss of an Eastern European gang. He also meets federal agents and provides them with additional information about the scheme he was involved in. And then he signs a deal. On December the 19th, 2016, George Cottrell changes his plea to guilty.
All rise. United States District Court for the District of Arizona is now in session. The Honorable Diane J. Himitua presiding.
Please be seated.
This is case number CR 16879, United States of America versus George Cottrell, on for change of plea hearing.
In return for a guilty plea on 1 count of wire fraud, it's been agreed the other 20 charges against Posh George will be dropped, including the accusations of blackmail and extortion.
Now please state your true and complete name.
George Cottrell.
And that is pronounced Cottrell?
Yes, that's right.
Now I need you to tell me, as best you can, in your own words, what you did that caused you to be charged with this crime that you're pleading guilty to today.
I knowingly participated in a scheme for financial fraud.
The tape is not the clearest, but George says, I knowingly participated in a scheme for financial fraud. And then he rattles off the definition of wire fraud, not mentioning many specifics, until the judge picks him up on it.
I need you to tell me as best you can what you did that meets those particular elements. So, for example, is it your statement then that you, through the internet, enticed or told people of ways that criminal proceeds could be laundered?
Yes, Your Honor.
And do you agree with this example that, for example, you made statements or described ways that individuals could perhaps disguise money, and that includes disguising proceeds that are legitimate business income for tax purposes?
Yes, Your Honor.
What did you intend to do with this money?
Keep a portion.
Keep a portion of it, he says. It being the money. Because George, in his plea bargain, claimed he never intended to go ahead with the money laundering scheme he proposed. Instead, he told the court they were always going to steal the $20,000.
And you did all of this through the internet?
Yes, Your Honor.
That crackly recording is, by the way, basically the only recording of Posh George's voice we were able to obtain after months of investigating. In January 2017, George Cottrell had been in prison for almost 6 months. He'd been convicted, but is still waiting for a sentence. And while he waits, Nigel Farage, his old boss who's just stepped down as the leader of UKIP, can be found surrounded by cushions and orange juice on the huge cream sofa of morning television.
Good morning, Britain, and a Happy New Year. Our top story this morning.
There, he's confronted with a front-page headline about Posh George. Farage aide faces 20 years for blackmail drug plot.
Nephew, George Swinfen Cottrell, 22, arrested actually when he was with you in America.
Farage is about to get an opportunity to distance himself from Posh George.
What's your reaction to this?
He's not an employee, he was a volunteer. He was unpaid, he was helping me do stuff, he'd been part of our party for a couple of years. We never had any suspicions about him at all. He faced 21 charges in America, 20 have been dropped. He's pleaded guilty to a C-grade felony. Listen, I can't be responsible for what everyone around me does.
Disappointed in what he's done?
Surprised that he was 20 years old at the time this happened. Guilt, no guilt, fallen into bad company, I'm not sure.
The show moves on quickly.
Let's end on a happier note as it's a new year. Can we get a camera on Nigel Farage's socks, please? Because the one thing
But I find his response fascinating. To students of Westminster, behind the Bon Hamid, Farage is a pretty ruthless guy. Like plenty of other politicians, he's happy to dispense with people who have threatened his position or suddenly posed unnecessary reputational problems. But here, it's the opposite. His response is cute, it's couched, but it's also clear. He doesn't know if George is guilty. What he does know is that he was young at the time. He's almost backing him. And when it comes to the sentencing, the judge in Arizona gives Posh George only 8 months in prison. Taking into account time served, he's practically ready to be released.
Venetia, you've been looking into how he got off so lightly. What have you found?
Well, we know he served 8 months, and that was the absolute lowest period of detention allowed by the US legal guidance. Posh George did also have to pay $10,000 in so-called restitution court payments, but to get an idea if this was a normal thing, given the context, I thought it would be good to speak to a lawyer.
My name is Paul Charlton. I'm a former career prosecutor. I spent most of my 16 years prosecuting in the federal system. For 6 years, I was the U.S. attorney in Arizona, which is the chief federal law enforcement officer in the state of Arizona. I'm now a partner in a law firm in private practice.
Paul was actually talking to me from his cattle ranch in northeast Arizona, and he told me he wasn't surprised by the sentence Posh George received.
What they typically call the loss amount was relatively small. Mr. Cottrell had no prior convictions. He was relatively young. He showed contrition at the time of sentencing.
And of course, Posh George claimed to want to steal the money rather than launder it, and the federal agents couldn't be certain what the real plan was. They can't be sure, essentially, if he is a professional money launderer or he's just a chancer and a thief.
What's your sense as to which it is?
Well, Paul, the prosecutor, said Posh George was, at the very least, very inexperienced.
I don't know what drug dealers there are that launder $20,000, but that's pocket change for drug dealers, especially here in Arizona. So that shows some gross inexperience in an initial foray with somebody who really doesn't understand the drug world or the money laundering world. If he was a genuine money launderer, he certainly wasn't any good at it. And I know there's no leniency for being ineffective at committing crimes, but there is some leniency and some mercy that's owed to individuals who are clearly fumbling through an attempt to make some money.
What I find really interesting here in the court documents is it really gives us a sense of the circumstances of George's life at the time of the crime. You know, we can see here that it was described as a dark period in his life and that he had a horrible gambling addiction. It even says that the reason he had not been employed before by his parents or his family members was because he was considered somewhat of a black sheep of the family and allegedly was disinherited at the time.
This is one of the weird dynamics in the story, isn't it? It's a sort of story of the glamorous world of high finance, but it's also a kind of very personal, quite sad story in some ways. It seems like at least the American justice system has partially leaned into that.
That they've sort of seen him as being a wayward child who's got messed up with some weird stuff. I should say at this point his parents are back supporting him as well, and the courts are basically giving him a shot at redemption, aren't they?
There's a general sense of empathy.
In March 2017, George Cottrell is released from prison. He returns home to the UK. For most people, a criminal conviction, an admission of a deliberate attempt to defraud someone of tens of thousands of pounds, would carry some stigma. But Posh George puts it proudly at the top of his now deleted LinkedIn page under experience: federal inmate. He gives an interview to a national newspaper which clearly contradicts his statements to the US court, claiming the whole thing was a misunderstanding, that he walked accidentally into a sting after being invited to a business meeting, and then, somehow, he's back with Farage. There are photos from that summer of George drinking on the street outside a London pub. He's swapped the orange prison jumpsuit for some dark blue tailoring. And standing 2 feet away is Nigel Farage. They leave together in a chauffeur-driven Range Rover, Posh George in the front seat. The convicted criminal once again in the Reform leaders' inner circle. Posh George has recently applied to Donald Trump for a presidential pardon for his conviction.
So I woke up with an invitation in WhatsApp to meet a source who has intimate knowledge of the Cottrell-Farage relationship, and it was quite the discussion.
Throughout this investigation, I've been recording voice notes to myself and my colleagues, piecing together the conversations with sources who've set out just how close the pair are today.
Said that the closeness with Farage is such that half the communication or more is non-verbal. They're just around each other all the time. It's like they don't need to be talking. It's like family was the phrase the person used.
Some of those I speak to portray George almost like a manservant. He's the one moving Farage's chair back for him to sit down, lighting his cigarettes. Other people said George is devoted to two people, his mother and Farage. And that phrase, like family, is interesting. Nigel Farage has described Posh George as like a son, and Cottrell has called Farage a father figure. In a recent interview with the high society magazine Tatler, he jokingly called the Reform leader Daddy. It is clearly a profound friendship, and one which has benefited both men. For as soon as Posh George leaves prison, Farage is there once again. He welcomed him with open arms, back into the firmament, the band of Brexiteers bound by their shared adventures the previous year, and back, I suppose, into his family. And George, suddenly flush with cash from activities we'll get onto, starts paying for elements of Farage's lifestyle. At first, these are small: dinner, wine, cigarettes. Farage then was in the midst of a separation. He'd moved out of the family home where he'd raised his 4 children, and there were rumours he was struggling for money. But over time, these contributions balloon. Prior to the 2024 election, Posh George paid almost £10,000 to send Farage to a right-wing conference in Belgium. George is also recorded as paying for Farage's £15,000 flight to meet Elon Musk at Mar-a-Lago in December 2024.
I spent an hour going through with him what his strategy was, how he got new voters registered.
Yet that is just what Farage has declared publicly. We at the Sunday Times Insight team can reveal that in recent years, Posh George has paid or provided for everything, from Farage's back office, to accommodation, to security, to members of staff. None of this has appeared where one would expect to find it, where it appears one should find it, in parliamentary registers. When we put this to Nigel Farage, he denied breaking any rules. But I'm skipping ahead. We'll get to the details later. In the meantime, let's stick with 2017. Posh George has managed to keep the confidence of Farage despite a criminal conviction. Now he wants to rebuild his future. At his sentencing in Arizona, the transcript shows the judge was concerned about what George would do next.
The question that looms in my head is, what are you going to do for employment, work, given the background that you have?
George Cottrell told the court he'd returned to education. He told the UK media he'd turned to charitable work. Instead, Posh George moved overseas and went to make his fortune from gambling and cryptocurrency. While making this podcast series, we approached both George Cottrell and Nigel Farage. George Cottrell says his support of Mr. Farage is the result of friendship and shared political ideology, not any hope or expectation of receiving anything in return. Nigel Farage described Mr. Cottrell as a long-standing friend. Both deny any wrongdoing. You've been listening to Posh George, the criminal behind Farage, with me, Gabriel Pogrund, along with Venetia Menzies and Emanuele Midolo. This series is produced and executed by Will Rowe and Kate Landell. The assistant producer is Colette Fountain. Sound design by Tiffany Dimmack. Theme title and original music by Adam Foran. And the head of podcast at the Times is Dan Box.